you been, man? How's the family? You okay?
Family doing fine. We just had a little daughter Tuesday.
Oh, man, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
what's
her name is Akiba.
Akiba?
Yeah. Yes. So we'd like to know if you allow, if we can ask you a few questions like we do every year in the Zed, and then if you could mention something about, for the people that watch the interview, about the soul and how Makua is our soul.
Oh, yeah, another day.
Okay, all right.
Another time.
All right.
I can't, I'm not equipped. As a matter of fact, Bunny's teaching right now. You know that, right?
Oh, yeah?
They're up there teaching now, so you should be over
there.
Hey, you, man.
All right.
I want to ask you about the Gilgamesh epics. Is that based on the Bible or for the Bible, for the Torah, Genesis?
Yes. When you mention the Gilgamesh epics, just like we explained earlier, you have what you would an explanation of, for example, 2 floods. And that particular flood that they're speaking of when they start in Genesis chapter 6 and they go over to Genesis chapter 7, it's talking about a particular area on your planet. But this area was observed by a man by the name of Utnapishtim in the Gilgamesh epics, who had the ability to communicate with certain beasts and reptiles, amphibians and fowls in order to acknowledge them and associate with them as a small child. And he grew up with this talent. So what happened is they took a portion of Genesis 6 and 7 and they adapted it from the Gilgamesh epics and applied it in there. If you had a Bible, you can see how simple it is. If anybody had a Bible, you can open up chapter 1 of verse 20 and you get a rendition of the fact that it's speaking of a creation period. But this creation period is talking about dealing with water, where it's talking about moving creatures and fowls coming out of water. If you go right to the next chapter, it clearly shows you in chapter 2 of verse 19, where they're talking about a creation by way of the ground, that the creeping things and the fowls come out of the ground. You have what you would call a nectaral observation in chapter 1, but in chapter 2, you're talking about the Sumerian doctrine, and that's clearly defined in the epics of Gilgamesh, because he was speaking of how beings came down. When they say the ground, they're talking about all the components of the ground. When you get methane, ammonia, calcium, gold, silver, all this makes up the word they use at the time was Bushra, the body, the outer shell. All of these qualities of the earth, of the ground, was used to construct this body. And thus, in that same chapter, it'll tell you, and then this Most High, this character of the Anunnaki, comes down and breathes into man's nostrils the breath of life, and he becomes no longer man, no longer beast, no longer Lulu Amalu. This character has become a living soul in the image and the likeness of the one that placed that breath inside. So when we step down, go to Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh also makes a point of talking about beings known as Scythians or simple known as Shaggies. You call them Big Feet. Then they talk about, in the knowledge about a classification of Nephilim, those that fell down and they became known as Nephilim. They also were giants. Well, when I look at chapter 6 coming out of that Gilgamesh epics being applied to the Torah or Genesis, I find out they said, and there were giants in the earth in those days, but they don't describe those days. What do you mean? All right, there were giants in the earth in those days. What days? So they're talking about something that occurred prior to those writings. And they were talking about these men of great statuettes. So when I say, well, how can I identify with it? Because I see big men walking around. Well, when I open up again a portion of what they've taken out of Gilgamesh and applied it to the Bible, I go to the 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 20, and I see where they're talking about a battle in Gath. It's chapter 21, verse 20. It's talking about a battle in Gath where there was a man of great stature. When you go back to the Hebrew, you can see that he was at least 8 to 10 feet tall, or 9. And he had on each finger 6 on each hand, 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. We know a lot of colored folks born with that little pinky over there, so that's their bloodline. They're Anunnaki, very aggressive, but they got that little, nub. And you got people got that little nub on their foot. They also of that bloodline. These were things that were discussed by Gilgamesh, as well as when you go to chapter 5 in that same book, the Genesis, and you see where it talks about these are the generations. This is the book of generations. And the book of generations is discussed fully in the Gilgamesh epics. There are creatures that Gilgamesh spoke about, unicorns, that you'll find in Numbers 23:22, and they recognize unicorns, as well as Psalms 92:10. They're talking about a horse with a horn on it, and a unicorn. But because we never see it, it becomes fictional, it becomes a myth. But he wrote about it, and thus the authors of the Bible, as we call it today, shared into it. And it goes on and on. So you can see things that are being questioned, see things that are being applied to the Bible, and you got to ask yourself, where is it coming from? And thus they were talking about books from before. Thus one of the books was the Gilgamesh epics. Okay? Talking to the mic.
So, the reason I asked you that question because I was reading about it in the Holy Tablet.
Right.
So, do I find that whole information on the tablet?
When you go to, you got your Holy Tablets with you?
I got a Holy Tablet right here. It's not
Well, after we finish, I'll show you exactly where, speaking of all the books that are mentioned, from the Gilgamesh epics, the Etana records, the Book of Destiny, the Book of Nergal and Aristogal, all of those are listed, and they're predating the Bible. That's why when you go down and you discuss Abraham's philosophy, here's what it was. Abraham was going through a point of time before Judaism, Islam, and Christism or Christianity, and he was given certain laws. But they didn't use the word as law as me and you use it. The word they used was Torah. So he had a set of books. He had a set, matter of fact, they were called pages, pure pages. And the word for pure pages, the language he spoke in, deals with the Sahuf. So he had certain things that he followed prior before the coming of any biblical script.
Let me ask you another question.
Yeah, chapter 25, verse 5 in Genesis. 26, verse 5 in Genesis. Yes.
Yes, sir. Are the so-called Jews familiar with this?
Yes, they are. In virtue of the fact that the J didn't come into the language until 1565, you know they are familiar with it because they stole it from somewhere. Let me tell you something about the Jews. When you talk about the Jews, and we discuss a chapter of the book of Ezra in chapter 9, and we start from verse 1 going down to 5, it tells you of those that are trying to emulate themselves as Jews. I was talking about it in the museum. What happened is, the people that call themselves Jews today, they know for a fact that if you go to such books as Ecclesiastics, and you go to what is discussed as God, God has a certain appearance that he approaches everybody with. And that appearance is what he looks like. Because we even, as Nubians, we even have a slogan, cleanliness is next to godliness. So when you see God, God is virtually in all white, pure, looking good, fly, from all the prophets to Jesus, all of them wore white as a sign of purity. But the Jews call themselves the chosen people. But they don't wear white. They wear black. And they have the curls. They wear a big black hat. No matter how hot it is, and them Canaanites burn it up, they keep that black on. And they have a beard in the Midian trim. What they're emulating is when you open up your script and you go to Jeremiah 14:2, it describes what the Israelites look of Judah or Yehuda, the Jews. It says that they are black as the ground. So what they did was they eliminated, they copied the blackness through their clothing, because the black clothes are supposed to emulate their skin. Then they have the twist, because they know there are no J's in Hebrew, and they're saying that they're following after the father of Abraham, who got verbatim most of his knowledge through two places. Out of ancient Samaria, at the time they translated as Babylon, and thus he left there and studied in Egypt. Now, you'll find two qualities there. You'll find for high priesthood, you'll find a braid that comes down. In Sumerian, they called it a Ninti braid. They recognized as Ramesses in Egypt, but it was discussing intellect and it's discussing of high priesthood. And if you notice, that's why they're twisted in. They wear the black hat, especially the one with the fur, because they're trying to have an afro. So basically, those Jews are emulating you. That's why the discussion in Revelation goes as this. I know the blasphemy of those people who are trying to be Judah, because remember there were no Jews in them days. I know the blasphemy of those that are trying to be Judah and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. And if you look at all Satanic, they will wear all black and stuff. All right? Okay.